Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DriveThruRPG review. My written and video review says take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at DriveThruRPG.com. For this video, I'll be reviewing the 5e sourcebook Iskandar City Sourcebook, designed by MT Black for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/RogueWatson. So source books is usually the thing I'm probably least excited about covering because it's usually a lot of dense information, and a lot of it isn't stuff that I'm necessarily going to use in my games. What I really like to look for third-party tabletop role-playing supplements is, monsters and adventures and maybe new subclasses and new just mini, dungeons I can drop in, just things I can do to enhance my own world. So when people create their own worlds, usually that's not too applicable for what my needs are. That being said, MT Black is one of my absolute favorite writers that produces 5e content because it's so well written and very well organized in a very easy to digest manner. Because a lot of, books get kind of caught up in their own minutia and their own details, and especially when you get to source books, often you can end up having a book that reads like a history textbook with like a whole lot of proper names, or like a dense fantasy novel. And that's not what I want, and I imagine not what a lot of people want from a source book. You want something that, yes, has some nice information, but it's more stuff that, ignites your own passion and creativity, and you don't get too caught up in all those dense details. And more importantly, it front loads all of the useful information in terms of, here are some jumping on points for adventures. Here are the actual encounter tables we can use, the actual part where you get to play in the world and not just read about the world. So those are all important factors, and for that reason I think Iskandar does a phenomenal job of presenting its information in a really well, easy to read format. Now, if you haven't looked at any of Black's work on DriveThruRPG, I believe they're all designed with the same kind of format, which I believe is an easing format. In other words, kind of skinny, smaller pages, and purposely a black and white art style with very, very little art, tiny pages, but big font. So it takes a little bit of getting used to if you're used to, for example, DM's Guild, where we've got very much the, sepia tone parchment paper and a lot of, stock art and sometimes original artwork as well. This doesn't have any of that, but I really appreciate the way it's organized. It's extremely well organized, and the actual big font, it just makes it so easy to read, compared to a lot of stuff where I literally have to squint in there and the art's not, well put into the pages and it just doesn't look quite right. Whereas here it's just so, I don't know, I kind of want to say elegant, and yet it's not a whole lot of art being used, but just in terms of the words alone, I mean, there is a little bit of art, and we do get one black and white sketch drawing of kind of an overland map piece of art. But otherwise, in terms of just having, a little kind of easing format, I think it looks and reads very, very well. So this is Black's, I think, homemade fantasy world of Iskandar, which is also the name of the big city. And this is a big, big city, 60,000 people. I'm not sure how big the cities are in the Sword Coast or Forgotten Realms, but this seems like it is gigantic compared to those. It has 6 different districts, and it breaks down each district into its own location, where it has its own important NPCs, its own story seeds, adventure hooks, as well as D20 tables to generate your own NPCs with their own characteristics, and encounter tables, literally 20 per district, to where you end up with there are some overlaps, so I think you end up with 100 total of unique encounters for the entire city, which is awesome. That is a great way of designing it. In front of that's probably about half of the material is the breakdown of the city, how it is now, and then the other half is basically giving you the backstory of this entire, well, not quite, because we do have, let's see, we have about 20 pages of some player focused content, which I'll get to, but the other fourth of it about is the backstory of the world, including its history, the religion, the governance, the languages, and all the details that you would need to know, which is, can be frankly boring in a lot of source books, and yet I was enraptured by this. I tend to skim. If it's a really long, dense source book, then I'm going to skim through a lot of content and just get to the stuff I think is interesting. I'll be damned if I didn't read this one cover to cover, which is really impressive. It honestly was interesting, but the way it was written in a very easy to read format got me excited about this world, even if I'm not somebody who's going to necessarily run a campaign in this world or anything. But it's interesting to read about, and what another person's creative process was for building this up, which is really cool. Just briefly, the world is it doesn't have, I will say this, it's not a world of elves and dwarves, which I appreciate the hell out of, because any fantasy world that can get away from the goddamn Tolkien stuff is a huge win in my book. Not that I don't like that stuff, obviously I do. We all grew up with that. I grew up with Dragonlance and Sword Coast and Tolkien and everything. But I really appreciate ones that don't just try to rest on that and then, we're going to change things a little bit. Like, okay. But here instead we have more anthropomorphic creatures. So it's there's a cat-like race called the Kith. There's like a reptilian race, part of this like elder empire. There's a wolf-like race who kind of lives in the icy reaches. There are goblinoids. There's humans, of course. And I found that a lot more interesting. And unfortunately, we only get a couple of the races in terms of the breakdown. Okay, here's our Jotunkin, maybe Jotunkin, for kind of an ogreish type race. There's even like deer-like creatures. I really appreciate the anthropomorphic take on races rather than doing the whole elves and dwarves and gnomes things. We only get 3 of them detailed in this book because those are the 3 that I think most commonly are found in the city. In fact, the ancient history is that this group of the Kith, the cat people, came across and founded this city with a bunch of humans. They both worked out really well. Their cultures meshed really well, and they basically founded this city, and that city grew and grew and grew. And then it went through all of these really crazy time period where at one point they got conquered by an empire, but they capitulated pretty quickly. So they ended up being just kind of enjoyed, I guess, or their culture adapted and changed to where they were just part of the empire for like hundreds of years. This empire ruled as part of their council, and it wasn't like this big oppressive evil empire thing. It was just like, hey, they were just the people that were big and organized and were conquering everything in order to make sure everybody followed their laws. And that's just kind of how it went. And that's kind of how history works in a way. It's not just like necessarily always the evil empire. They're just like, they're the bigger, more advanced ones, and they tend to just assimilate other people. And yet the culture was so strong here that it turns into the kind of melting pot. This is really like the New York City of fantasy worlds, where it's this huge melting pot of all these different cultures and races and creeds and faiths. There's a whole Templegate district that's just full of like every single different god and house of worship that you could possibly want. It's really interesting, and it even says, another great organizational tool, 5 things to know about Iskandar. The very first page is like, hey, here's 5 important takeaways before you even get to everything about this, specifically this city. And one of them is it's highly cosmopolitan, so it is all about those different cultures coming together, which is really cool. So we only get a brief look at some of the races. I wish we got some more, but maybe there's more, more of these source books coming that can kind of fill in the gaps. On the one hand, it sucks to only get what feels like a limited amount of the races. On the other hand, it makes it that more palatable to try and read and parse out. So we're not just looking at this entire world building of this, thousands of year history for all these different fantasy locations. Instead, it's just one city, which is a really great way. If you're going to piecemeal it, of introducing others to your work, that's actually a pretty solid way to do it. And it's probably a good idea to start with the major city. This is like, if they introduced Eberron through just the city of Sharn, or if they introduced the Forgotten Realms through just Waterdeep, like you could actually get a pretty good extrapolation of how the entire world works based on like the biggest major city of your area. So for that reason, I think it's pretty cool. The 3 new subclasses are for cleric, fighters, and rogues, and they're pretty good. The cleric one is all about darkness powers, the night domain, which seems pretty cool. I love the fact that you can summon a shadow at 6th level, and you can choose to meld the shadow with your own to give yourself necrotic resistance, because I think otherwise the shadow necessarily wouldn't keep up with your leveling too well, but necrotic resistance always pretty good. You can also just shroud people in darkness, causing damage and render them incapacitated, which is pretty nifty. The fighter, Cinderwood Knight, is a straight-up warlord from 4th edition. I'm not very conversed with 4th edition, but I know people swear by the warlord, and it really feels like you're basically using all these maneuvers to, move your allies around and give all these kind of buffs and support stuff, which very much seems like what that class was. And then the Rogue Blade Dancer feels like a better version of is it the duelist? I think there's so many subclasses now, but it just feels like it does a really good job where you can make performance checks to try to gain sneak attack. You can move through allies and people. You gain extra fighting style, but it's only either dueling or 2-weapon fighting. It definitely feels like it fits that archetype of the blade dancing fencer sword master, but with a rogue as a base class instead of something like just a dex fighter. So all three of them are pretty good and thumbs up. And really, they do have ties to the world, which is pretty cool. The Cinderwood Knight, obviously, because that's Cinderwood is one of the cities, and they were helping break the whenever these demon arms. So God, I have to go over the history now. So after the Iskandar got conquered by the Empire, that lasted for a couple hundred years, and then the Empire eventually had this civil war where the warlord was off. One of them was off, conquering some other land, and then his niece usurped the throne, and he came back, and they had a big infighting. And then the niece ended up unleashing this huge mega bomb spell that ended up, instead of doing whatever she wanted to do, it destroyed the entire city and created this gateway to the abyss, where then henceforth poured a bunch of demons out into the world, and the demons started invading everybody, including Iskandar. But Iskandar was able to basically repel them, and then they had all the other, sister cities that came in and kind of helped save the day. So it helped them a lot. And then there was another point where there was this giant winter came in, like this freaking Game of Thrones style winter that lasted like years. And then because that winter came in, these like savage barbarians from the Winterlands came up and conquered Iskandar and ruled for like a couple years. Like it's crazy how this city is like this shining jewel, and yet it's also has a very marked history. But perseverance is like the name of the game here. It is like got a rich history of bloodshed and war, and yet the city itself just still stands and is still this kind of shining big cultural touchstone. So it's got a really, really neat history, and it's reflected in all these different subclasses too. The blade dancers are part of this group of this faction that is basically just a bunch of blue collar martial artists that essentially just train everyday people on how to center themselves and focus and all this positive mental teaching through physical fighting. And that's what the Zobraki House of Blades does. So that's pretty awesome. So I really like the history here. There's a lot of really great winter is the winter that lasts several years. The Fiend War, when the winter recedes, the demons came back up and they had this big invasion, and I think that only happened like 20 years ago. I really like the history. It basically just breaks it down to important events, and what you don't get bogged down in is a bunch of proper names and people. And I hate when history does that, because you can't help but roll your eyes and be like, look, I can't keep up with all this. You can't keep giving me this is that so-and-so, the second of their name, and they ascended to this person. It just reads like just a fucking history book, and I don't want that in my source book. So instead, this one just keeps things interesting and talks about the wars and the conquering nations, and occasionally there's a king or something that needs to be named, but otherwise we don't even worry about that, which I love. So let Black do all the future history books, please, because I really enjoyed reading about the history of this place. So it breaks down, how does, work and leisure and the government and the police force and the currency and the economy and trade and the government and all these different things of the city. And it's more interesting than you think it is, but it's also, there's not as much drama as the actual history was involved. What I really enjoyed getting to was the actual breakdown of the city districts, because here's what it looks like now. Here are the districts, and here's how they work. Old Town is basically a slum. It's got these super narrow alleys and dark streets, and, obviously has been the oldest part, and it's falling apart. There's a huge slums everywhere. And contrast that with the Rise, which is like this, all the hoity-toity magic users live there, and it's literally sealed off by this, like, invisible wall of force with, like, gargoyles perched on the edge who charge people to even get inside. And it's a whole bunch of really... There's like a university in there. It's very like high class and hoity-toity. And then you've got the market square, which is of course this just giant bazaar that's the biggest in the world and just well known for having just everything you could possibly need. Temple gates full of all the different factions of temples and priests, almost like having a restaurant row, but full of like temples and houses of worship. Really, really awesome. And I love the way it breaks down that every single location has every single district has 3 important locations, multiple important NPCs, which could be like, hey, they're the leader of this house, or or just maybe it's a shipmaster or somebody, and then there might be some kind of hidden secret or drama included with each of those people. Maybe somebody is being blackmailed, or somebody's secretly a night hag who actually runs the bathhouse, which I thought was pretty freaky. There's a lot of just really interesting, drama to do with all these different people. And then the tables are so cool because not only do we get these named NPCs, which are important, but we also get these impressive D20 tables, which includes name, occupation, clothing, which is a really fun way of describing somebody and kind of quickly getting to, maybe who somebody is or who they're pretending to be and who they're showing you who they are. Appearance and personality. And you can obviously roll on those D20s multiple times to just combine all those different things and just you've generated an NPC. That's awesome. Every single one of those 6 districts includes one of these tables, and they also include this D20 table of encounters. Encounters could include a woman committing arson in a warehouse, a shouting match between priests in the temple district, someone's mounted on a griffin flying overhead, and the griffin just shits all over that player, and the noble just laughs their ass off. There's a drunk poet who offers to do like a slam poetry, but does it like just fucking lays out and clowns the player characters. There's a lot of classic like thief shakedown tactics where we lure you into it. Can you help me find my way home? And they lure into an alley, and then they get jumped by their comrades. Or hey, oh no, this person collapsed, we need to help them, and then they pick your pocket. They're all of those that you can think of. Basically, if you just want a book of urban encounters, you could use this source book as that. There are a ton here, and what's nice is there are 20 for each district. So some makes more sense for the Harbor District, which is full of taverns, and some make more sense in Old Town, where you'll have all those different thief things and narrow alleyways, and others you'll have a lot of the more magical stuff happening in the Rise. Like I love the one about 2 awakened familiars that are just battling each other by shooting flame bolts at each other. Or one of them is there's a spell book running on little legs, and there's a apprentice wizard chasing after it saying, stop that book. Like it really all makes these different areas come to life and very well reflects the world and the culture and everything that's going on in those different districts. So you could take little bits and pieces of that to build your own city pretty effectively. I just love all these different, and like I said, there are a few overlaps, and in the end, I think you get a total of a D100 list of 100 unique urban encounters that fit a variety of different locales within a city, as well as 100 different or maybe more NPCs with all those different generated stats on there. That is awesome. That is just really incredible. Huge thumbs up for that. And then adventure seeds, which are all the adventure hooks. Now, none of these are, full-on developed mini quests or anything to that level, but they do give you, a solid, good paragraph of a starting adventure hook, really, which it says adventure seeds. That's what it gives you. So examples could be being tricked into transporting stolen property. You might be hired by somebody, and then you're jumped by, some thugs, and then you make it to the warehouse, and then you realize the person, comes to you and says, hey, I was trying to get this back, and those thugs were actually my guards. Like, what the hell? And it's this huge, drama. And then there's one of them that you have to track down a stolen book that you go into a were-rat, into his underground lair where he's got a bunch of rats down there. One of them is you're tracking down a werewolf because people are being, killed, throats torn out and everything. And it's a werewolf hunter, but you realize the fact that her father is also a werewolf hunter was turned into the werewolf. So she's hunting, but also doesn't want him to get killed. So there's an interesting bit of drama there. One of them is that you get hired to save a woman because you get a ransom note from the family, and then you go and track her down and find her, and you realize that she joined the Thieves Guild and she sent the ransom note. Just all these really fun little ideas, again, for urban encounters, for expanding all the things that could take place in the city. Some of them are monster combat encounters. There might be like a painting where a creature comes out and comes to life, or somebody's got like an ettercap on a leash, and again, it's a crazy city. And then something startles the ettercap and it goes crazy. Like there are combat opportunities, but there's a lot of also opportunities for just exploration and role playing, and just again reflecting how much interesting and fun that you can have in a city. Honestly, this is just a gold standard for how to create not only a city source book, but just probably a source book in general, and just take what I took and just apply that to all of these different districts and areas, and they're all just absolutely amazing. So let's go over my pros. I mean, look at this this is all just that table of encounters. Like, holy crap, and they're all really, really well done. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Iskandar City Sourcebook. Pro, expertly organized and easy to read. I cannot stress this enough. The giant font, the compact pages, the subheadings, the way it gives you the those 5 things to know at the front, and the way it's written for the easiest way to understand things without getting bogged down in a bunch of those proper names and nouns, and we don't need to know thousands of years history and everything. Just give me the cliff notes, really. And this does that, but doesn't quite need to dumb things down like cliff notes. So it's very, very well written and organized. Pro, each of Iskandar's 6 districts has its own notable NPCs, location, and adventure hooks. So multiply that, and you've got basically all the content here, but I appreciate that it breaks down by location, and then further by district into those individual locations and people and stuff, which is how you bring this city to life. Pro, multiple D100 tables to generate NPCs and encounters tailored to each district. Huge thumbs up that I love having those tables. You can generate all that extra content. If you have one of those encounters and it just says, hey, it'll just say a man or a woman or whatever else, that you can just roll on those tables to determine what that character is. And then I like the adventure seeds as well. They were all generally pretty good ideas. More information would be great, but it's a seed. That's what it's supposed to do, and I'll accept it. And Pro, 3 new races and subclasses, which all worked for me. It would have been nice to get more of the races who all appear here, but I think the idea is it gives you the more maybe common races that you would find in this area. And then hopefully future supplements will include more, continue to expand the world and kind of complete the race stat block section. And subclasses were all awesome. I would love to see the designer make some more subclasses that were a reflection of this world. Cons, there's very little artwork in here, and I get that's the easing style, so that is the style that we're looking at, which is not supposed to have a lot of artwork, but still compared to a lot of stuff that is big, sexy, nice, flowery art, and especially for a source book, it really helps me personally to be able to have that visualization of like a really nice art of a top down of the city would have been cool, or something else to have. So that is a complaint of mine. And then the other one is that we don't get any stat blocks here. So we do get the new player character races, but no new stat blocks. Despite this being an entirely new fantasy world, it is still very much everything is just a 5e stat block. So I would have at least, give me some example stat blocks from maybe the Kith, the Vargar, and the Vatbarn, which are doppelgangers. So that would have been a little more interesting, and maybe, use some unique creatures to make your fantasy world come to life rather than just use all the it makes it easy, right? You can use all the creatures that are already available, that's fine. But if it's a unique fantasy world that's completely new, might as well have some fun with it and give me some new creatures along the way. I think would have been a little more interesting. Final verdicts: by focusing on a single, albeit huge city, Iskandar City Sourcebook expertly breathes life into this new fantasy world of conquering nations, invading demons, and a bustling city that's full of adventure and intrigue. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com, and you can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And please support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Ty Dancer, Christopher, Thomas, Adam, Stan, Nathan, Alex, William, I'm Loud, Al, Kyle, Sklenia, Genocider, James, and David. And Gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Blood Angel, Vronis, Nathan, Fasica, Tortoise, James, and Perry. Thank you all very much for your support.